Good morning or good afternoon or whatever it is where you are in space-time. Today we're going to look at page 248. We're going to look at the fear of Frankenstein. Those of you that have your books, 248. Those of you that don't, go to Google Classroom and there's a document with all the stuff on it. So before we start, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction. We're not actually looking at Frankenstein. We're looking at a very wrong use of the word in terms of genetically engineered things, specifically foods, and the whole concept of genetic engineering. For a long time, back when this book was written, we were calling genetically engineered foods Frankenstein foods, just as a sort of slang word that didn't really fit them very well in the first place. And there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of people didn't trust genetic engineering, and it's, well, now that we've got hindsight, we can look back on it and we know that we were right. It was just a disaster waiting to happen. But let's see what they thought back in the 80s or so when this was written. Some people feel that scientists should not tamper with our genetic makeup because more serious problems than we faced before might arise. That is exactly what happened. Monsanto, one of the biggest genetic engineering companies, started producing genetically engineered foods, specifically soybeans, rice crops, tomatoes were a famous one, corn, that kind of thing. They couldn't even get the tomatoes right. Interesting experiment somebody did. They put an ear of corn on the floor in a barn and an ear of genetically engineered corn, and none of the rats, hungry rats, would not eat the genetically engineered food. We've now noticed a massive uprising in cases of cancer. All sorts of other health problems are caused by it. The soybeans, which are now in everything. All American food contains soya and modified sugars, and it's causing so many problems. The soybeans are suppressing testosterone, so men are becoming far less manly. Something like a 70% reduction in testosterone, the male sex hormone, from people eating these genetically engineered soy products. Crazy. I mean, you'd have to be pretty naive not to think this was partly at least deliberate. I mean, when Monsanto, in their canteen at work, where they serve food, they only serve organic food. They don't serve their own genetically engineered food to their staff. Tells you a lot. Now, I'm going back before I even came to Cambodia, but Monsanto had Blackwater on retainer. Blackwater was the world's largest paramilitary private army. Basically, they're a paramilitary organization of mercenaries. And now, why would a genetically engineered food company have an army? And they did. And it was common knowledge. They weren't even denying it. So this was, there was something very, very weird going on. Other people feel that we should do everything we can to prevent illnesses and diseases. And that's fine. We should. We should certainly be preventing people from getting sick. But it didn't work. It made people sick. And they say now the genie's out of the bottle, which means the genetically engineered code, it's out there. Monsanto have dumped this into the food chain. The seeds are out there, they're modified, and they're taking over. And there's nothing we can do. We can't stop it now. Genetic engineering, it got out. And unless we fully understand the technology and get out there again and reverse it, it's just going to carry on. And there's nothing we can do about it. What views do you have about this? What problems do you think can be caused by changing the human genetic makeup? Well, this is an even more extreme outlook. Engineering humans. Now that's something very different again. I mean, some of this is pretty mundane. We saw a video in one of the grades I taught where it was a genetically engineered goat. And what they'd done is they found that spiders' webs, silk from the spiders' webs, was something like 20 times stronger than Kevlar per size. So the problem was we can't farm spiders. Spiders are far too aggressive. They kill each other if you try and put them together. And they don't produce a lot of silk. So they took the gene that makes the silk and they put it into a goat so that the goat's milk had the extra gene. So basically what you do is you collect the milk and you can literally get spider silk out of the milk. The goat died of cancer. Now, what would happen if we started genetically engineering humans? They did this in China. There was a eugenics experiment to make humans smarter. Obviously didn't work, obviously. It never does. It never works. We simply don't understand our genome well enough. It'd be like me getting one of you to build a house. Just saying, well, you've seen a house, just build it. I mean, you know what a house is. You know it needs a kitchen and a living room and a bedroom, but that doesn't mean you can go out and build one. You don't know anything about planning codes. You don't know anything about routing the sewage. You don't know about how the electrics work. You don't know about where to put the houses so that they're protected from the weather. You don't know why the roof is the shape it is. In different parts of the world, buildings look different because of different weather conditions. You don't know any of those things. And that's where we are with human genetic engineering. We've got to the point where, well, we know that the DNA says this, so we figure we can change it. But we don't really know any of the other consequences of changing that one thing. In Thailand, when I was driving through Thailand, everyone's houses were getting flooded, full of water. And when we went out into the villages, nobody was getting flooded because their houses were up on stilts. I said, well, why do they put the houses on the stilts? And they went, yeah, to stop flooding. Right. So why don't they do that in the cities? Why don't they just put a driveway underneath so that their houses are protected? Because they want to look more Western. They want to look like Western houses, but we don't live in a Western country. And we have totally different weather conditions and totally different needs. So shouldn't the house reflect the needs rather than the social demands of an uneducated population who just don't really understand what they want? No, they just want houses to look like this. Right, okay. But it's much more important that things work. And that's what we're doing when we talk about changing human genetic makeup. We're changing what we want without understanding of all the consequences. We might be going one way, but we're also damaging ourselves and undermining very complex abilities. We have no idea about how human intelligence works, and we can't change one thing without changing everything else. I would be very, very against changing my human genetic makeup, say for instance with having my RNA modified in any way by people who aren't competent to do so. Very dangerous times, so I'm very much against this. Scientists are constantly making breakthroughs and developing a clearer understanding of the way living things work and how they can be healed or even changed. True. But again, we're not really understanding. It's look at this. Scientists are constantly making breakthroughs and developing a clearer understanding. That basically says the scientists are blundering around. They're trying this. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In England, we had the first genetically engineered sheep, Dolly the sheep. She was on the news. They cloned a sheep. They copied the DNA from one sheep. They made a new sheep that was a copy of the old one. And everyone was very proud until that sheep died very young. Because basically what they'd done is they hadn't taken into account the fact that the sheep they copied was already in middle age. So when they copied the DNA, they didn't know how to allow for that. So Dolly the sheep aged prematurely and died a few years later. She didn't last because we just simply didn't understand what we were doing. Genetics is the scientific study of the way in which different characteristics are passed from each generation of living things to the next. Research in this field is increasing the understanding of how genes make us what we are and how genes can be changed to prevent diseases and illnesses. Read the following article and think about the responses to the issues raised. Well, now, looking back on this with hindsight, we now know that the people who were afraid of this technology, who were dubious about this technology, were the ones who were correct. The people who went around trying to change it, usually illegally, they were the ones who were acting wrongly. Well, we know that. Things went wrong. It went completely wrong. And it's going to go even more wrong. Watch this space. So we're going to read through this. So if you've got your book, we're going to look through page 248, 249. If you don't, look on Google Class. The pages are there for you. So just have a look at those. And then we'll read through this text, and then you can answer the questions. The questions, again, will be on Google Classroom if you don't have them. And then we'll go through the answers. Okay. Mention the subject of genetics and many people will react with hostility.
This is interfering with nature, some might say. It is something we should not do. Mary Shelley's novel about Frankenstein the scientist, whose attempt to create life had tragic consequences, might be mentioned. Frankenstein's foods was one description the news media used to describe genetically modified food, for example. We are living in a time of great discovery about human genetics. Like most other things, perhaps, genetics has come to be seen as either good or bad. Good genetics improves our ability to diagnose and treat serious diseases, such as muscular dystrophy, as doctors and scientists find the causes and cures for these diseases through the study of genes. Bad genetics could be used to create a genetically superior super race by discriminating against those with faulty genes or poison the environment with alien organisms when scientists alter the genetic makeup of existing life forms in the course of research. What is life anyway? What is life anyway? Is creating life in the laboratory something we should steer clear of? A distinguished panel of biomedical ethicists, theologians, and scientists came up with answers that amounted to no problem. The ethical debate was prompted by a series of experiments at the Maryland Institute for Genomic Research, TIGR. These experiments were carried out by the bacterium, Mycoplasma genitalium, which has the least genetic material of any known organism, just 480 genes. Humans, by contrast, have around 100,000 genes. It actually appeared that the bacterium only needed about 300 of these genes to survive. To find out if these were truly all that was needed for life, the scientists would have to manufacture the genes, insert them into an engineered cell, and see whether it sprang to life. Bioethicists are people who study the ethical and moral implications of new biological and biomedical discoveries and advances in such fields as genetic engineering and drug research. Arthur Caplan is a world-renowned bioethicist in the University of Pennsylvania. He assembled a panel of experts to debate the issues surrounding the question of how far genetic research should go. The outcome was surprising. Given current public fears about genetic modification, no one had any objections to minimal genome or synthetic life research, said Caplan. Look how that turned out. Playing God. One issue the panel wrestled with was whether creating synthetic life amounted to playing God. They decided that it did not. They decided that intervening in the natural world is no bad thing, as long as it's done for human good. They pointed out that some of the benefits that could come from this research might include designer bacteria to eat pollution, or mass-produce new drugs, as well as great scientific insights into the nature of life. Scientific knowledge gives us a way to understanding how the world works, and we are as much a part of the world as anything else. A great deal of who and what we are is influenced by our genes. We can make choices about the things we want for ourselves and our children. But they should be choices that stem from knowledge and understanding, not ignorance and fear. People have reasonable fears, but they are fears to be addressed by society, not genetics. Should genetics be closed to scientific investigation? No, it should not. Taboos, to quote a popular science magazine, are simply a bad excuse for not thinking. Knowledge is surely better than ignorance. Letters to the editor, changing our genes. Before we start doing germline gene therapy, reprogramming the genes in an egg or sperm cell, we need to decide whether we want to change what it is to be human. We need to decide whether there is something about human nature that is so valuable that we shouldn't change it, even if it could be done. This is involuntary intrusion into future generations. The whole thing is very chancy. There are so many ways in which we could go wrong. Who knows what the effects of our actions today will be in 2080. Moving forwards, we are gaining the power to intervene in a realm that we've never had access to by introducing new genes into the flow from one generation to another. Some people say you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, but I think we just have to take responsibility and move forward. Now there's that word, I think. Duplicate babies, no thanks. Every child should be wanted for itself as an individual. In making a copy of oneself, a parent is deliberately specifying the way he or she wishes that child to develop. I suggest that there is a greater need to consider the interests of the child and to reject those proposed use of cloning. tomato sauce. If you saw the tomato in the wild before it was domesticated, you would see a little tiny green bitter fruit that nobody would eat. Across the last few thousand years, humanity has bred it selectively, changing its genes by selection, to give us the thing we call a tomato. Where scientists have used genetic engineering to alter one gene that's involved in ripening, that is infinitely less than all the things that have been done so that the plant in the last 2,000 years. It just doesn't make any sense to be concerned about that as a foodstuff you eat. There are certainly legitimate concerns that I think everybody has about genetically modifying organisms and putting them out in the environment. The concern is that appropriate tests be done to make sure that they don't have unwanted effects. The voice of reason. We shouldn't underestimate the public. People have a lot of common sense. I can see suspicion of the new and the untested. The government and big business give us information that hasn't necessarily been to our benefit, so the public is being wary. We've done great experiment now in a lot of ways. Genetically engineering things into the environment. It's not different in quality from breeding by conventional mechanisms, but it is a different pace, and so I think it's reasonable for people to raise questions. Not that I'm saying we should stop, I'm just saying that there is a balance to achieve, and it will emerge with time. Okay, so we've had a look through, I've read through it. Let's just pick up a couple of points, because a lot of what we said in there is just nonsense. The problem is this was written a long time ago, and it's a fairly biased article, and we've seen a lot of things come out now where it's proved or disproved a lot of what's been saying in here. Let's go backwards from the end. Let's go back to the tomato sauce. Yes, it's true. We've genetically engineered tomatoes. Originally they were inedible little green fruit, and we've selectively bred them out. We've done the same thing with animals, we've done the same thing with a lot of other plants, all sorts of things. But there's a big difference between genetically engineering it. Think of it this way. If you took a car, you took an ordinary car, just an ordinary family car, and you put a sports car engine in it, okay? That's what we're talking about doing. We're talking about taking an engine out of something fast and powerful and putting it in a family car and seeing what happens. Well, I know what happens. I know what happens because I've got experience of it. The brakes aren't going to be powerful enough, the frame isn't going to be powerful enough, you're going to twist the chassis, you're going to crash, the steering isn't going to be up to it. None of the rest of the car is built for that engine, and it's not going to work. But when things evolve naturally, even from racing, things get better. The average family car today is very different from a family car 50 years ago, because we've learned lessons through racing technology, through cars being raced on the track. Now the average family car is almost as fast as a racing car from 70, 80 years ago, probably faster. And when we're genetically engineering our foods the old-fashioned way, the genome is stable. All we're doing is modifying one choice element, and nature is protecting us from our stupidity. When we're genetically engineering something, we're taking one thing and another and we're sticking them together to see what happens, and it rarely works. Now, I admit that this is an analogy. I'm using this as a reference, but it doesn't work. And unfortunately, I've been proved right. I've got 30, 40 years of genetic engineering history to look up on, and it didn't work. The plants that were coming out, they were released before they were ready. They did have massive side effects. They're inedible. They're causing cancer. They're causing diseases, and they're taking over crops. They were designed to survive where the other crops would fail. They've taken over resources, and we've now realised this was a terrible idea. So this didn't make any sense. The voice of reason. I'm not saying it should stop, but there is a balance to achieve, and it'll emerge with time. Unfortunately, we weren't given time. We weren't. We were just told, this is happening. Monsanto wants this because there's profit in it. Duplicate babies, no thanks. Every child should be wanted for itself as an individual. No, James wasn't. I'm perfectly open about that. It was not planned. We've made the best of it. The idea of designer babies has been going around a long way. We're going to end up that way. It's coming. It's coming. People will choose how their babies will develop, what they will. First thing we'll see is gender choices, and that's going to be very dangerous. Look at China.
They keep unearthing, opening up these graves full of female babies. This has been a huge problem over there, where they try to limit the population, and people want male babies, so they kill the female baby so they can have another one. And this has been an ongoing problem. They all want male babies. Now, if we could genetically engineer our children so that they could have those male babies, there you go, problem solved. But it wouldn't be. Nature is very good at this. We see about 50-50 split. Normally we see 50%, 52% female actually, and 48% men. That's to allow for the 2% of women that can't have babies, because humans aren't very reproductive. We're actually not very good at reproducing. Now nature knows that, and nature's got it absolutely down perfect. And we're talking about messing with that because we think we're smarter than a system that's worked for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly, flawlessly. Makes no sense. Changing our genes rather, before we start gene line therapy. We need to decide what it is to be human. But we still don't know that. 20 years on, we just think that human is just being alive, but it's not. There's so much more to being human. In fact, we're undermining humanity. Taboos, to quote a popular science magazine, are simply a bad excuse for not thinking. No, culture is a bad excuse for not thinking. Knowledge is surely better than ignorance. Yes, it is. But how do we come by that knowledge? Do we come by it through constant failure that causes serious and significant problems to the human race? There's another line here. They decided that intervening in the natural world is no bad thing as long as it's done for human good. Well, we're not the only creatures on the planet. We're part of a very delicate biosystem. So if it's done for human good, that doesn't necessarily mean it's done for the good of everything else. And that's what we keep forgetting. You know, we're modifying one organism that also feeds other organisms, and we're part of a delicate balance, and we're ignoring that. The issue the panel wrestled with, I mean, we've got this research panel, and they said, no problem. That's clearly not ethical. And when we look at how scientists work, they're usually paid off. They're a very, very corrupt bunch. I find it very hard to believe that a group of them would go into a room and come out and say, no, this is fine, let's just do it. It doesn't make any sense. It's already too late. We already have artificial life. We consider the male and female part of life to be a unit, and we have got machinery now that will print life. We can put in the basic chemicals, we can print those into different orders, and we can create biological living organisms. Very, very simplistic, I mean very, very crude. We can do it. But it doesn't mean we should do it. And it begs the question, what really is life? If life is just a mixture of chemicals, then is it even worth it? Is any of this worth it? And it begs a further question, why do we need this? What do we really need it for? Because we're talking about preventing diseases and illnesses, but also these people are also saying at the same time, the world is overpopulated. We want to produce new cures so that people live longer, and also get rid of the amount of people in the earth. It makes no sense. These people contradict each other all the time, and it's very dangerous. Should genetics be closed to scientific investigation? No, it should not. It doesn't matter what I think. The fact is, this has always been open and always would have been. It was always going to happen. But we've now got 20 years to look back on it, and we know that Monsanto was hideously corrupt. We know that other genetic engineering was horribly done. It wasn't managed ethically, it wasn't done properly, and we're now suffering the consequences of it. People are living shorter lives because of this. People are getting cancer in higher numbers. It's appalling. Never trust any kind of genetically engineered product, because it's constantly been proved that we couldn't even get tomatoes right. Okay, answer the questions. It's on Google Docs or in the book, and we'll go through the answers in a minute.